Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to tackle a really important topic, gender and public policy. It's an issue that gets right to the heart of how our government and public institutions are supposed to work for everyone. So, let's dive right in.
And a big welcome to our little study group for PP 5340, Introduction to Public Policy and Management. What we're doing today is breaking down the readings from Section 10, which is all about gender and public policy and administration. We're going to stitch together some really powerful research to see how this all connects.
So we're drawing from 6 key sources today. We'll kick things off with a big picture review from Bishu and Alkadry, then zoom in on pay discrimination with Alkadry and Tower. Stivers is going to give us that crucial historical context, and then we'll look at performance data with Agostino and modern frameworks with Bearfield. And we'll tie it all together with a really fantastic case study from Alkadry, Bishu, and Ali.
Okay, so this is the central mystery we're investigating today, the big question that connects all these readings. The public sector is literally built on ideals of fairness and equity. So why does the gender pay gap hang on so tough? It's clearly not just a number. Our mission here is to figure out why it's so incredibly stubborn.
All right, let's start with that big picture. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, we need to understand the scale of the problem and the major themes that keep popping up in the research.
So, first things first, is this gap even real? Well, the work by Bishu and Alkadry, which is a systematic review, basically a study of all the other studies, makes it crystal clear. The conclusion? Oh yeah, the pay gap is absolutely real and it's everywhere. Now, to be fair, the public sector does a bit better than the private sector, but it is far from perfect. In their review, they found 4 key things that keep driving this gap. You've got direct pay, hiring, all the usual suspects. But there's one that really jumped out as the key to this whole puzzle: disparities in access to workplace authority. Remember that phrase, it's going to be really important.
And that leads us right to the core idea we're exploring today, this concept of a hidden authority gap. This is a really powerful idea from the readings, and it suggests there's a much sneakier kind of discrimination going on that you can't see just by looking at someone's job title.
Now I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, we have laws for this. If 2 people are both director, shouldn't their pay be pretty much the same? It seems like common sense, right? Well, the research from Alkadry and Tower says not so fast.
And here it is, the authority gap. This is the big reveal. It's not about whether you get the fancy title, it's about what you're actually allowed to do once you have it. It's a huge difference in real responsibilities. We're talking the number of people you manage and the size of the budget you control. Alkadry and Tower call it a covert replacement for direct sex-based pay discrimination. Wow! Okay, so theory is great, but we need to see this thing in the wild. And this 2017 study of city managers is the perfect real-world example. It takes a whole group of people who all have the exact same title, city manager, and then it looks under the hood to see what's really going on. And the main finding? It's pretty shocking. On average, female city managers in this study earn just 73 cents for every single dollar earned by male managers. So, what explains a gap that big? Here's part 1 of the answer. Male city managers, on average, were in charge of 278 employees. Female managers, only 166. That is a massive difference in responsibility, even though they have the exact same job title.
And it's the same story when you look at the money. Male city managers controlled budgets of about $55.4 million. For female managers, it was just $34.3 million. Same title, but a totally different scale of power and authority. That is the authority gap, clear as day.
So a system like this doesn't just appear out of thin air. To really get why an authority gap even exists today, we have to rewind the clock and look at how the entire field of public administration was built in the first place. So how did we get here?
Camilla Stivers' work here is just fantastic. She argues that from the very beginning, public administration basically had a split personality, divided along gender lines. You had the settlement women, who were focused on substantive goals like social welfare. They were asking, what should the government do? And then you had the bureau men, who were all about procedural methods and efficiency. They were asking, how should we do it?
And listen, these weren't just friendly academic debates. These were deeply ingrained social rules. Stivers found that male reformers who dared to venture into that substantive social welfare side were viciously mocked. Get this, they were called names like Miss Nancy's to attack their masculinity. That kind of pressure made sure that the masculine world of procedure and efficiency became the official, dominant way of doing things. Okay, so that's the history. But what about the consequences today? Let's connect these historical gaps to actual real-world outcomes and see where the conversation is headed now.
This brings up a pretty logical question, right? If women are systematically given less authority, fewer people to manage, smaller budgets to control, does that mean their agencies are just less effective? Does that old bureau man model of authority actually lead to better performance?
Well, Maria D'Agostino's research gives us a really surprising answer. She analyzed federal employee data, and she found the exact opposite of what you might expect. Agencies led by women actually scored higher on positive performance ratings from their employees, 62% compared to 58% for agencies led by men. So let's pause and think about what that means. The huge takeaway here is that good performance is not necessarily tied to those old-school male-coded models of authority. That historical link is broken by the data. And that realization, it just blows the door wide open for a new, smarter way of thinking about what equity really means.
And this brings us to a critical modern framework, which we get from Dominic Bearfield's work, Intersectionality. The core idea is simple, but so powerful. You can't just look at gender by itself. To really truly understand inequity, you have to see how different parts of a person's identity, like their race, their class, and their gender, all overlap and interact with each other.
This quote, which Bearfield uses from Stivers, just sums it up perfectly. Gender isn't the only thing that matters, but it's an absolutely critical lens. When you look through that lens, you start to see things like the hidden authority gap, which then helps you see how other things like race and class create even more complex barriers. It all connects.
So, let's do a quick recap of our journey today. First, the pay gap isn't just a number, it's a symptom of a much deeper hidden authority gap. Second, this gap has deep historical roots. Third, despite all these barriers, the data shows that women-led agencies often outperform. And finally, the only way forward is with an intersectional approach that looks at everything together.
And that leaves us with one final big question to chew on. We've gone beyond the numbers and the job titles, so now we have to ask ourselves, what does a public service that's built on real, genuine equity actually look like? And, more importantly, how do we start building it? Thanks so much for joining the study group today.